Let's call the meeting to order, and it's a little after 6. Let's join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Are there any suggested changes to the agenda? Hearing none, the agenda is approved as circulated. And then we have approval of minutes. Any changes to the minutes that we've recently been handed by the secretary?
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
I have, I don't know, 2 or 3 questions, I guess. I would like to point out that I was not at the meeting last month that these minutes cover, and just clarify, because sometimes there is a misunderstanding. A person doesn't need to be at the meeting to deal with the minutes. We're not, in my case, I'm not guaranteeing that everything was verbatim, but when I vote on the minutes, it is denoting my belief, my confidence that the minutes accurately captured what they needed to capture. But anyhow, having said that, on page 4, number 7 in notes, it says, Darnell, no, because it's not the reasonable minimum amount necessary. I can't vote yes. And then it says, Smith, the chair votes yes as well because it's not the reasonable minimum amount necessary. I'm guessing that there's something different. You essentially said the same thing but voted opposite, so there's either it is or one of the knots doesn't belong there.
I think you're right. I think what I may have said is because it is the reasonable minimum amount necessary as opposed to it's not.
Yeah, that would then make sense to me.
Just so you all know, what is put in the matrices is word for word, because I go back and I listen.
Oh, live stream was scratchy. Oh, no, that was,
Well,
sensitive.
let me suggest, I'm not sure exactly what our function here is, but if we can change these minutes to make me not sound stupid, I'd appreciate
Okay,
that.
why don't I delete not the and just put it's, or it's the reasonable amount necessary?
Yes, that would make me happy.
Delete not, okay, you can do that.
Do you have others?
yes, sir, on page, I thought there was one other one in here. I'll keep flipping through if I didn't mark it, but page 9, number 5, Darnell highlighted in yellow. I'm guessing that was something that maybe the recording secretary could not pick up.
And
In the audio?
Peter was able to
Correct.
do it either.
I could not hear it either. That's right.
Okay, so we'll delete
Yeah.
that. Yeah, because Don had something nice to say, but I didn't get it written down, and I thought I could listen to it later, and I didn't.
I think that's all I have.
I have one more, let's not make the chair sound stupid.
Okay, which one?
On page 2 at the bottom, I wish what I had said was, in the past, we have decided, as opposed to, we kind of decided.
That's word for word.
I don't disagree with what you have said.
And I don't think anyone's going to pay attention to that, other than you.
He does have the opportunity to kind of correct the record, though, I think,
But
if he
how do
wants.
you want it to read?
I would say, in the past, we have decided, as opposed to, we kind of decided.
Because it's okay for the minutes to paraphrase the conversation and not be a direct quote. So I don't have an issue if
If the idea
chair
is
would like to make
right,
that
if the
change.
idea is properly reflected in the minutes, that's the important thing.
Yes.
Not the verbatim words.
Yep.
That's right.
Okay, in the past, we decided that if there is any possible way for people to get a two-car garage, okay, is that how you want to say?
Yes, please.
Very good, got it.
I've stopped making efforts trying to not sound stupid. It's just not
Can't
possible
help it.
anymore.
We're trying to make the minutes as accurate as possible.
That's a different story. Stupidity works still though, right?
This is a rough audience, huh?
It is hard.
Crowd.
I just have one question slash, if I might, Brooke. Okay, on page 5, we talk about Janice, the motion by Darnell, but we do not, did we not repeat the motion with the adjusted 20-foot setback?
He did. Motion by Darnell based upon the applicant's representation that they could build this structure within a 20-foot side yard. I move to amend the application to consider a 20-foot setback as opposed to a 13-foot setback. Motion seconded by Philip.
But we didn't make a motion to approve the variance?
Oh, I see, not the
No,
application.
all you voted on was to change the application to a 20-foot setback.
Well, then we redid the standard review though. Okay, and then I see the motion on this page 7. Okay, I'm good.
Is that okay, Dad?
No, I'm fine, thank you.
And in that same section that we're talking about fixing, what he said was, I think, that they, what he meant to say was that they could build this structure with a 20-foot setback. I don't think we're going to let them build it within a 20-foot
structure.
setback.
Right,
This structure with a 20-foot setback?
Yes.
okay.
I think that's,
You know, I guess while we're on that page, if we look at the second line down from the top, MC said with the board's analysis and conclusion, that should be board apostrophe S.
Where was that? On page 5?
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, second line down.
ZBA could withdraw motion to approve the master variance.
No, very top of page 5, but the second line, MC Moritz said that with the board's analysis and conclusion,
Okay, so how do you want it to be changed?
it should be board apostrophe S.
Except, you know what, spell check, didn't put that in there.
sometimes it just isn't smart enough.
Just doesn't believe,
Right.
doesn't believe.
How does spell check know if it's supposed to be possessive or plural or
Yeah.
plural possessive?
Unless
Three
you have-
choices, how does it know which
Unless you
one's
have really good spell check, yeah, that's not gonna help.
I'd like to make a
Okay.
motion to
cut this off?
accept the minutes as, approve the minutes as amended.
Oh, Beth is voting, Beth is making a motion.
Support.
Okay.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
Marty, you were the second,
Yes, ma'am.
The minutes are approved.
as edited,
As edited.
Yes.
amended.
All right, I think that item 5, public comment, we can skip over that since we're not seeing any. Before the meeting, we discussed the public hearing review procedure a little bit, and I'm wondering if it would be possible, maybe for Sam or somebody, to simply print out a couple of pages that have the public comment policy on them, put one at the podium here and put one at the table back there, and take this reiteration of the policy out of the agenda. And we have no action items, and we have another public comment that we can skip over. And so now I think we're ready for concerns of the ZBA and Director of Planning and Zoning. Let's start with our recording secretary, because I always do. Is there anything that you'd like to tell us about this evening, Janice?
No.
Okay. ZBA members. I guess some things, but I think once we start talking to our helpers, then I'll know what to do. So, Director of Planning and Zoning, talk to us.
Well, good evening. My name is Megan Massinot. I've met Marty, and I've met Janice and Ashley, obviously. But it's a pleasure to meet you in person tonight. I apologize that I wasn't able to be here last month. It was suggested that I come here and also talk to you about the zoning ordinance. There's a number of amendments that have been requested to be made with due haste. However, also when I've been a planning consultant for 20 years and I'm with Cromwell Workman Associates since 2017. And when I've been involved in walking into a new community and looking at their zoning ordinance, there's usually a story as behind every little peccadillo. It was suggested that you all would have many of those stories to share, and we're a wealth of knowledge as we're going through a zoning ordinance audit to see kind of group amendments and things that can be done quickly without a lot of effort and also community engagement, and then other things that maybe need to wait a little bit until the master plan is approved, and also then we need some more study and or community engagement. So wanted to take the opportunity tonight of a meeting where you had minutes to approve with no cases to ask you about them. And Mr. Chair, you can facilitate as you want, or if you would want to turn the facilitation over to me, I'd be happy to do that as well.
Well, I guess my thought is that I had a couple of things that I wanted to discuss. I don't know if other board members also have things that they want to discuss, but if there are things that you think should be at the top of our consideration, we could hear from you first.
We're in the process of doing that, but what I can report is that you have many, many zoning permits that are required where it is very unusual. And feel that those, we've been told by Chelsea Area Construction Agency that many of those, such as the zoning permit for re-roofing, isn't necessary. And then, again, in 20 years, I haven't ever seen a zoning permit for that unless you were changing the pitch of the roof and there was a roof pitch provision in your zoning ordinance, which I haven't seen in yours. So that's an example of one that's risen to the top. There are also some things then that, for your temporary use permits, they could be a little simpler and also more expensive for some things that have come up since October, such as we've had requests for farmers market type temporary event, and also at a local shooting range, extended hours, kind of night shoot. And basically in both of those cases, there wasn't any way to evaluate those because you've got very specific goals for your temporary uses, and there's not a general kind of catch-all that you can have. But that's an example of something that maybe probably needs a little more study and a little more community engagement, because once you put those rules into place and you have a temporary event that maybe some people feel is a nuisance, you've allowed somebody to do something when it was within the rules, and you've changed the rules maybe there wasn't. So really in terms of things that need to be changed right away are things dealing with permits and public hearings. For instance, also you require a public hearing for every single site plan, and that's very unusual and not in good planning practice. Because it's an administrative function.
Depending on this whether it's a major site plan or a minor site plan? Is that how you're going to divide them up, whether they're major or minor, or how are you going to have no site plans be I mean, this really isn't our jurisdiction, I don't really, just out of
Right.
curiosity.
No, well, I can answer that question, I'd be happy to. So a site plan is an administrative function. So if it meets the rules, the planning commission, they're the approving body, they must say yes per the law. If it's a special land use, or if it's a rezoning, those are required to have public hearings by state law, and they also have what's called discretionary standards, whereas the site plan is not discretionary. So when you notice everybody to come and give input about this decision, if it's a black and white decision, a lot of times the public will come with the idea that they could influence the decision, and often not they can't, because if the planning commission is abiding by the rules of black and white, it's a pretty cut and dry decision. So some communities do choose to notice the site plans, but in some communities do choose also for their township board or their city council to approve every site plan. That wanders into, that is also something that's not in keeping with.
So state law requires any site plan, no matter this is interesting to me because it's different than my experience in another jurisdiction was. State law says that site plans, no matter the size, no matter what they are, can only be, if they meet the requirements, it must be approved. There's no negotiation over a site plan. If the applicant meets the requirements, he gets it no matter what.
He should get it. He or she should get it.
Okay.
The planning commission can impose conditions that, to make sure the site plan stays within the requirements of the law.
Well, if something's administratively approved, then so what's their discretion?
Yeah, well, where's the discretion to add
Conditions, because either you qualify or you
Yeah.
don't. So how do
Well,
you,
you can add conditions, it's just that they have to be related back to the standards.
And isn't that something that the public might be interested in?
That might be something that the public is interested in, and so, again, that would be another thing that, why I wanted to come talk to you, is to see why these things were required, do they work in your community, and should they stay or should they not? Whereas some of the zoning permits seem like it's this pretty straightforward thing, but again, I'm new here, Ashley's new here, we don't know, and like I said, there seems to be a story behind each one of these.
I would hugely defer to the planning commission on this issue, but it just seems to me that a lot of times you have public hearings and people have ideas, and I don't know.
And there probably is, different level that you would want, even if it's not technically required to have a public hearing. I think most of the time, the opportunity for participation is better than just handling things administratively. Now, that does not extend into all of the various zoning permits that you're mentioning. But just finish up that thought, I guess, is, yeah, you're having fresh eyes on it, and we should take a look at all of that and bring us into whatever the modern era is, bring us not necessarily into conformance with what everybody around us does, but let's figure out, kind of like halfway best practices, and make sure that we're not just out there doing something stupid because, that's the way we've always done it. What I can speak to a little bit without saying anything useful perhaps is the history of the current zoning ordinance. There are a couple of people on the planning commission that have been around for a long, long time, much longer than me, and then without I guess going through the entire roster, I may be third, and I came on just around the time of COVID, and what I still refer to we're not making any progress, we're going to do it, then it got kicked back to the planning commission, and then it got, and the sequence might be out of order because I didn't live through all that, and then a consultant was brought in, given what I envision as like, shoebox full of ideas and thoughts, and said, here, make an ordinance out of this. I saw that there were a lot of things, some substantive, some not so much, but really required a review. What I was told is, hey, tonight we're going to pass a zoning ordinance, and everybody has looked through this for a number of years, it's ready to go, and we ended up with 2-3-hour meetings, mostly with just me going through stuff, typos, things that this section doesn't agree with this section. And I'm not saying that I'm all that, but it is an indication that there are a lot of things that need to be uncovered. Some of them big, some of them not so big. There are some things that for sure I would like to revisit because I don't understand what the logic is for how does this support even our old master plan and the public engagement on the new master plan did not really yield hugely different thoughts on what the township ought to be. And I don't see in some areas how the zoning ordinance really supports what the vision of our township residents is, what they think the township ought to be off into the future. So those get into some pretty big things. Now specifically, part of what prompted this discussion was a couple of meetings, well, it's probably 3 meetings ago now, where I think ZBA was dealing with the decision criteria under the new zoning ordinance for the first time, and it was probably Beth was the one that pointed it out to us. Okay, it was Brooke that pointed it out to us that the wording is different. It doesn't say, I think the reasonableness was taken out of the decision matrix, the decision criteria, and we're trying to figure out, well, darn, was that intentional? Was that a typo? Was that, where did that come from? And in that first meeting where it mattered, I remember Beth was the one that brought sense to it, that it is mentioned in the text of the zoning ordinance about however it's written, a reasonable amount, but that did not carry over into the decision criteria. Well, everything except this meeting that we deal with on ZBA would use that. So that was an urgent thing that we do need to get corrected and through the planning commission, so it removes that ambiguity. I mean, reasonable can be ambiguous on its own, but when we've got it the way that we always did it, which does seem to be supported by the narrative in the zoning ordinance, but isn't in the exact content of this matrix that we deal with when we go through appeals, that needs to be corrected ASAP. The other one that we've dealt with recently, a couple of meetings ago, was this apparent conflict between, well, if I have this much land and I want to put a shed this size, which seems to be the standard size or falls within what is commercially available in a prefab type shed, yet I can't have a reasonable ceiling height and a conventional pitch to that roof without running askew or foul of and that was one of the more dissatisfying, I guess, meetings that we've had where we, I mean, not as individuals, but the township, due to the way the new zoning ordinance is written, required residents to come in and spend their evening with us to deal with something that never really should have been an issue. So,
And pay a fee.
and pay a fee, which I
It's
think
not cheap.
I think staff did not collect from them. But yeah, it was, we didn't really accomplish anything other than go build your shed. You should have been able to do that administratively. there are probably some other things in there like that just haven't been tested yet, because we haven't, I mean, that was the first,
Building height.
was the first shed that came to ZBA after the new ordinance. I don't know how many other permits were issued that didn't require ZBA participation. Yet, a few years ago, I guess, there was a person that wanted to build a pole barn, which seemed to make sense and had sufficient acreage and setbacks, and the way the subdivision was laid out, it's nothing more than what a lot of others had. But there was, I don't remember that exact issue, the size. The size was a problem, setback was a problem, and about all we could tell them, or I think David Rohr told them, well, that'll be corrected in the new zoning ordinance, and it was. But anytime you change something, there are undoubtedly unintended consequences where you fix that thing that everybody was focused on, but these things that I don't even know why the wording got changed probably need to be reviewed. So anyhow, long-winded, but the one that I think we immediately need at ZBA is the decision criteria. The rest of these can come in a more orderly fashion. And Megan, just like you said, you kind of triage these things. Okay, these are the quick, easy to do, probably only correcting errors that, never should have crept in there, or misunderstandings of something. And at the other end of that spectrum would be the, how does this density, this overlay district, this whatever, how does that support the community's vision of what we ought to be living in and around? So, longer term on that, no doubt.
Comments?
And that's really just a short way of saying, I don't know the history on that stuff, but it is,
Yeah.
there are some things that are kind of monkeyed up that we need to fix.
Yeah. And I think the other issue that keeps on coming up, at least on a fairly regular basis, is making sure that we have sufficient documentation for making these decisions.
Oh, yes.
And this is something that Brooke raises regularly, and I wanted to make sure that we do address this evening.
It's in my list of things to talk about.
Okay, so to go back to what Marty was saying, though, I'll give you the section. It's section 2906, 29.06, in variances, and it's under decision criteria, which is part C, and then item number 4. Item number 4 says reasonable amount. The variance is the minimum, and what the ordinance says is the variance is the minimum amount necessary to mitigate the practical difficulty. It used to be, what is the reasonable amount necessary? I mean, if it's the minimum amount, we may never negate a practical difficulty.
It creates quite a quandary for us,
Yeah.
because you can always shave an eighth of an inch off of what somebody's asking for.
And so the question becomes, is there a legal issue for why it was changed? There is no, as far as we're aware, there's nothing in the documentation that supported this change during the time of the ordinance creation.
Right.
So it then becomes, well, is there a legal issue?
There is case law.
Yeah,
There is case law that governs what a practical difficulty is and what's the minimum amount. And I don't know off the top of my head whether reasonable is a term that's within that. And I know that at the planning commission, you looked at an amendment with that language at your October meeting.
Yeah, it was one of the discussion items that we do need you to massage that around to what, actual ordinance amendment would be, and then, we'll take it up after the first of the year.
I would also say in this case that, well, for any ordinance amendment, your township attorney should look at it.
Right.
But especially in this case, because the standards for variances that are written into the zoning ordinances come directly from case law. And that case law, which is based on litigation that's occurred, changes.
Right.
And your township attorney is going to be much more aware of what the nuances are of that, in order to, and so we want to make it as accurate as possible.
Right. So that brings up my third big issue. So number one being the changes we need, generally speaking, including this one, to what is desired in terms of a packet for the ZBA to review. But also three, let me rephrase that. What is the most expedient way when we do find these holes? Because I'm sure that in reviewing these, generally speaking, we're not going to find all of them. And they're going to come up at some meeting and we're going to have to say, hey, ding, 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 we have a problem here. How do we make sure that is, when we identify these, they are communicated to the board, to yourself, to the Board of Trustees, to make sure that the actions are being taken to address these issues? Like, I want to make sure that
Yes.
we don't have 5 meetings in a row
Yes.
where we're saying,
Because we have raised issues that seem to,
Yeah.
without going into details, which seem
Yeah.
to have died on the vine.
right,
We've been assured we're looking
Well,
at.
we first brought this problem up.
3 meetings ago.
In March, I
Yeah.
think.
Yes, yes.
And so-
And we're assured that. it's
And we're
gonna be-
assured it was going to be moving forward, and instead, you're assuring us that we'll look into it some more and talk to the attorneys, and
Yeah.
yet, people are still gonna be coming to us and asking for variances,
Yeah.
and we still don't have a standard to apply that's quote reasonable
Right.
to their requests.
So I want to make sure that we have an understanding of what we're supposed to be doing
Yeah.
to make sure that these things are elevated and addressed immediately, as soon as they
And may I address question number 3?
Yes.
So, I apologize I apologize for the situation that you're in. Ashley and I have only been here a month.
We won't blame you for this
Yeah, we
until
don't
next
blame
month.
Yeah.
Strive to do better. In terms of, again, going back to the case law and best practices dealing with variances, so you talk about practical difficulty. And in that, what you're looking at is the extent to which this case is unique in the neighborhood or the surrounding area, or does it affect everyone? The classic example is that you've got a lot at the end of a cul-de-sac that's pie-shaped, and so its setbacks are different from the rest of the neighborhood, which is just, let's just say, is like a traditional village plat, so it's all the lots are square. And they can't make the front yard, the backyard setback because of the odd shape. But if everybody in that neighborhood was trying to put on a deck that's a reasonable deck, and no one could, what the municipality should do is change the law to give that relief to everyone. Rather than when you have, and you're going to have these exceptions, and that's why the ZBA is here, of the pie-shaped lot. So, in general, to answer your question, when it's more than one person in a certain area, or more than one property, because we should only talk about properties and not individuals, when we're talking about variances, then that's when it raises to the level of, it should be an ordinance change rather than granting a variance.
Right.
Well, we have a history of approving variances, which I have voted in favor of them commonly, wai we have allowed things that are common in the neighborhood, and we allow them for that reason, because they're common in the neighborhood. But all the others are themselves non-conforming a lot of times. So you are describing a situation we very much have in the lake areas, where these lots are very small, and we help these people, nothing unreasonable, but something that's common in the neighborhood, but they all require variances, because almost everything is non-conforming there.
Right.
And again, your analysis is absolutely correct that what should be done is that every one of these neighborhoods ought to be looked at carefully and
Yes.
their requirements changed. However, over the last 7 years of trying to figure out what to do about these problems and coming up with an area-by-area approach, ultimately, when it was time to adopt a new zoning ordinance, they were like, all right, well, there's going to be Lakes residential districts, and you have to have a quarter-acre lot, and here are the side setbacks, and we'll apply this to everybody, because nobody could come up with the formula that fixed things for the people who were in the most densely packed
Yes.
Lakes residential areas, and they still come to us on a regular basis with, well, hey, I just need to be able
Right.
to have a garage.
I think
Right.
that makes up 90% to
Yeah.
95%, but that's really not my third issue. My third issue is this. For example, 2 meetings ago, I believe, we found that in section 16.11, item number 4, regarding maximum height for a residential accessory building for a larger lot, for a lot of an area of 1 acre or more, the maximum height for residential accessory building shall be 25 feet. And then we found a conflict in section F of that same section 1711, which said, buildings meeting the provisions of this section shall have a maximum height of 8.5 feet. And there's a discrepancy there, and I really need to read more of it, but there's a discrepancy there. So my question, number 3, was, when we find these issues, what's the proper procedure for
Yeah,
us to take
This one is
to
just
make
really
sure?
obvious. That
Yeah, this
should
one
get
was-
out of there and should get out of there right away, and it's an easy fix.
But I will tell you, being a person who regularly looks at documents all day long and has to review and find inconsistencies, not always I'd like to think I was perfect, but we don't always identify them. So when we do as a board, what is our appropriate, do I just write you an email? Hey, Megan, I have this problem? Or, what's the right procedure for the board to follow now that the township is organized the way that it is? How do we make sure that those are remedied? And that's really my third concern. My third concern is not the 95%, because we deal with that, I think. My concern really is every time we identify this red flag, how do we make sure as a board that these things are being communicated to yourself and the Board of Trustees so that appropriate amendments can be made?
Will you be at our meetings?
Ashley will be at your meetings. I am an unusual guest.
Okay.
So, but I think probably the best way to do this is that, number one, Ashley and I are working as a team. I'm here at the township on Tuesday mornings, and then assisting from behind the scenes in our offices on a daily basis. Ashley's here 4 days a week, 9 to 3. She should be your main contact.
But let me work through this.
Well, I haven't quite said
Okay,
everything
sorry.
yet.
Okay.
Is, in this case, to answer your specific question, Ms. Philip?
Philip, yeah.
Philip, sorry.
It's the right way to spell it.
Yeah, is, at this point in time, I would appreciate if you would email me all of those things that you've noticed.
Okay.
And then, as a matter of course, what I think it should happen is that at this point in time where you have comments by commissioners, that when you have these concerns, they should be voiced at that time and then put in the record. So then you have them down in minutes. Then I would also say is that ideally you don't meet that often, right?
Right.
But you meet 4 to 5 to 6 times a year.
It's not been as frequent this year. In the past, it has been more frequent than that. Sometimes we've had 8 or 9 meetings a year.
So I would say when you do your election of officers, because that's going to be at a certain meeting every year, I would also take an agenda item, and you can write this in your bylaws if you want, and that way it's got to happen. Write in your bylaws that you will go over zoning ordinance amendments. You want the planning and zoning director at that meeting And then you could make a formal motion after that to communicate zoning ordinance amendments to the planning commission. And that way, things are on paper in formal motions to go forward.
Okay.
Okay? So,
That sounds
so
good.
did I miss, are you going to be at our meetings, or are you not going to be at our meetings?
It will not be, I'm not going to be in your meetings unless it's an unusual circumstance
Okay.
like this, or unless it's specifically
So
requested.
my suggested modification of your suggestion is, in the past, we have been able to directly discuss these issues with the Director of Planning and Zoning, who was always at our meetings. Since you work regularly with Ashley, could we not, once the board has spotted something that's a problem, and we make a motion that says this is a problem that needs to be addressed, can't we just rely on Ashley to communicate that to you? And hopefully that will move things along.
And then my only other question to add on to that is, what notice do we need to provide to make the motion? Can that just be part of that meeting where the issue's identified? Okay.
I would think so.
Let's do that.
It makes
It's gonna be
sense
a
to me.
request.
It's just gonna, we're
Right.
gonna like,
It's
whoa,
not,
this is a
it's not a legal
problem.
requirement
Yeah.
that the ZB, that we
Yeah.
recommend a zoning change or
Right.
anything. It's just our
Right.
normal
Yeah.
business.
Now,
Okay.
I also expect that there is another mechanism, less formal, where Ashley is going to pick up on some common themes that, oh my gosh, those guys, for the 5th time this year, dealt with somebody wasn't able to put a porch up without coming to the ZBA, and she will proactively come up with the resolution of that, oh, well, that obviously should have, and it kind of gets to what Megan was saying about if it happens in the whole neighborhood, we don't want the whole neighborhood to have to come to ZBA. That ought to be an issue that is fixed outside of here. But even if we don't focus on it and say, whoa, here's a problem, I think Ashley's going to be doing that on our behalf.
Yep.
Yeah, we spend a lot of time during the day talking about weird things we find in the ordinance as we go about the day.
I'm glad that we can keep your day interesting.
Yeah.
It's an onion.
Yeah.
I've heard that said many
So-
times.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I think the one item that we didn't hear a lot about is what you want in your packet.
Actually, there's another thing that when you're thinking about possible changes to the zoning ordinance, and this goes, I think, to something that Beth and I have worried about from time to time. The section 2905A suggests that the applicant should submit materials to the Director of Planning and Zoning, which may include an accurate site plan or plot plan.
I saw that the other day.
And I don't know why we cannot fix that so that it says, which shall include, unless the Director of Planning and Zoning or somebody else that you want to administratively anoint determines that it will not be necessary. So that when they get here and we don't have anything that's really useful to work with, we can either say to them, why are you here? We didn't get your documents. Or say to whoever made the decision to let them just come, why are they here?
Right, they shouldn't even be on the agenda until they meet the requirements.
That was what I was going to try to get to, is we should have you guys be the gatekeepers so that we don't have to look at a document that doesn't have all of the dimensions that we need and then try to figure out how we're going to try to help this poor person who's taken the night off and they're here and they've got this terrible drawing that you can't tell what's going on.
And that was in the ordinance, what you were, that specific language?
I gave you the language from the ordinance where it says may.
And I know the ordinance obviously is what we have to follow, I will say, the application itself does say they have to, so that's what I do tell
Good,
people.
I
No one
appreciate
has
that.
challenged me on that thus far.
Right.
But, you know,
Well,
there,
no, wait, it says irrelevant materials as determined by the
Yep.
Director of Planning and Zoning, so
Which may
you
include.
certainly can determine that they're necessary, but I don't think it's a good idea for you to ever think, yeah, I don't think that's
yeah.
necessary.
I'm
Is all I'm trying to
plotter,
get at.
plot plan or site plan, I can't see a situation where that would.
Right, and then later on in the ordinance, the things that are supposed to be in a proper plot plan are enumerated, and they should all be there, as opposed to just, well, some of them we'll use and some of them we won't. And that will make our job a lot easier.
Yeah. Sorry, and just to back that up, or to follow up on what Brooke just said, there is this applicant guidebook, a variance guidebook, I'm sorry, which is on the website. And it looks like, and I may be wrong, but it looks like the language in that guidebook does need to be updated to reflect the current zoning ordinance.
Okay.
Because there are references in there that, upon initial review, do not look like they belong. We'll just put it that way.
But yet, as you say, it's really useful to people to have that guidebook, and so,
Yeah.
next.
On this same page, I just happened to notice, which reminded me, the applicant's responsibilities. Applicant shall post public notice sign clearly visible from front lot line, blah, 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 blah. It must have been a couple of meetings ago, because I was not at the last one, but when I went out and did the on-site review, I looked all over for that thing and realized that, oh, there's like a little 8.5 by 11
Yeah.
down here.
The main sign
And,
is missing.
and there've been a couple of transitions. So when I asked that question before, I don't know, so I will ask it of the both of you. Someplace kicking around here, there should be some great big yellow signs.
We have them in the
Okay.
office, and I know where they're all at, and.
All right,
We
great.
have
So
told people they
you're
have-
already
Yep.
geared up to
Yeah,
use
on top of
those, because
that.
I think we maybe lost that, missed that
Yeah.
in the transition
Yeah.
before.
Yeah.
Will you be routinely checking to make sure that the posting is proper?
Yes, and the property needs to be staked
I
appropriately
was going to
as
say,
well.
that's also a thing, and that you'll be on that, on every one of them, just going
Yep.
out there, or somehow or another making sure that they have in fact shown us where they propose to make their changes.
Yep.
Good.
And then one of the other things, I'm very strong on this, it doesn't require it in the ordinance, but I think it's extremely important that the applicant shows up. And the reason I say this is because, again, 2 meetings ago approximately, with the garage situation and the 20-foot setback. So it was initially noticed at 13 feet, the setback. And we were uncomfortable with 13 feet, but they were able to live with 20 feet. And so we were able to actually ask the property owner, is 20 feet enough? Can you live with that? Because we were willing to approve 20 feet at the meeting. We felt like, you know, the community around had been noticed at 13. Nobody voiced objection at 13, but we felt that was a little bit
Right.
more.
If they were not here, they would have been rejected.
And if they were
the fact
not
they were
here-
here, they were able to get their variance.
Yeah. So, and it may be that's something that we need to raise with the
And
township
a meeting or two
attorney.
before that, the applicants with the shed were not aware that they needed to
Need to
come.
be
So
here.
Yeah.
we kind of,
That's right.
yeah, we did some,
We dragooned
some
them.
shadow puppets on the wall for a while.
And waited until they could show
While,
up.
yeah, while somebody, went and got them, and we worked through all that, and it was resolved.
And I don't know how that, again, I don't know if that's something that, in my mind, it does belong in the variance guidebook. It probably doesn't need to be part of the ordinance because people can elect to have a representative there for them. But it's something that it has been helpful and I think will continue to be
You could
helpful.
even, if, I don't know how changing that guidebook has to be done. in the past, I'm pretty sure that it was just written by the Director of Planning and Zoning without
Yeah.
any approval from anybody else. From what I'm hearing from Beth and everybody else is that if it just said in there something like, it's probably a good idea for you to appear in person because it might help you. And
I
then-
will say too, obviously I can't speak to what was being done before, but anyone that I have talked to from when I started to now, and will continue to do it this way, I spend quite a bit of time while they're submitting the application, really thoroughly going through the process and the timelines that are expected and what is expected of the applicant and what we do behind the scenes and what your role in the process is, what our role in the process is. And that is one of the things that I have stressed is that more people in your team that you can have here, the better for you. Again, it doesn't necessarily influence the decision one way or the other, but it can't hurt to have you here to field questions and, be available to discuss things.
Yeah.
Ashley, it's a pleasure to have you reassure us about the process because what you're doing is exactly what we'd like you to do.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now, along the lines of making sure that we have all the documentation on that, I've wondered in the past, distant past, at ZBA and Planning Commission, could we just have a note in our packets that whatever the notification was that was required, just tell us what that is, and then tell us that it was satisfied, notice in Sun-Times News, such and such a date, or adjoining property owners, were sent notifications on such and such a date. And in the case of Planning Commission, if public hearing, probably the most likely one, if we required a public hearing, that it was properly noticed in Sun-Times, blah, 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 on whatever date. It's just kind of like a check mark to make sure that, okay, we're all making sure that the process is being followed. We didn't go through a meeting only to find out that, oh, nuts, that one didn't make it in the paper, blah, blah, blah. And we took action that we weren't actually authorized to do because of that. I mean, is that, I don't want to get too, oppressive with some of this, but
I've seen communities where in the planning commission or ZBA packet, there was, and it's easy enough with anything electronic. We have an electronic copy of what was sent to everyone with the 15 days, and the date of that can be on the bottom of when it was sent.
that'd be excellent.
The notices that were sent to the Sun-Times, and with the dates usually on the top, we put those in. Some communities require their staff to have clippings and scan those in. That can be done, but that would be extra work. It wouldn't be as easy to do.
I think if we were just assured that it happened, that would be okay. There have been cases where, where I've asked, darn, I didn't see that in the newspaper, and I was assured, well, it was in there. And obviously, I missed some things. There is, and this would probably be something good to mention to Bob Nestor at next Planning Commission meeting, but there is kind of a peculiarity with the Sun-Times News in that the inside pages don't have dates on them. So even if you did have the image of, here was the notice that was in the paper, there wouldn't be a date up next to the page number.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, that's not something we can change, but.
No, I mean,
I'd
for
be
whatever,
curious, yeah.
for whatever reason,
I
that's,
Personally, I don't know that we need to, you might disagree with me, which is fine. I don't know that we need to know the details, but at least a sentence every time that says, you have checked and staff has reviewed all the advertising and notice requirements, and they've all been met.
that would be ideal, because I think previously we were told that, it was there.
Right.
Which is not the same feedback as, okay, yeah, we sent the thing in, it should have been there,
Right, if, we want a
We
positive
saw it,
statement.
we know that it's
Right
in
there,
there.
a positive statement, the
Yeah.
staff has reviewed all the notice and advertising requirements, and then they've been met. Should
Thank
be a
you, that'd be
statement.
excellent,
Should be
yeah.
a statement that should be in every one.
And not to get too specific, but I think section 7, or whatever, the action item, there's specifically something about public comments, letters and emails, comments from public in attendance. Right around that point, I think in the agenda would be a good time to have that discussion.
It just,
Just a
you know,
thought.
helps potentially keep the township out of trouble if somebody,
Back
somebody doubted that that happened, and, oh, nuts, we can't prove it in this case, but somebody's already broken ground for something.
Yeah.
Ms. Bradbury and Mr. Mayor, did you have anything else to add? We've heard a lot from the other board members.
No, I think they pretty much covered it for me.
I wouldn't even say, my concern is this area where we are approving variances really, where there really are, those are really zoning problems, not variance problems.
Yeah.
Particularly in the Lake District, and what we allow there. As I said, I vote to approve them too, because that's historically what we do, and I think that's what the people want, and the neighbors don't object, and people need it. But it really does conflict with the ordinance, because everything there is non-conforming, because they're so
Yeah.
small, so anytime practically they want to do anything, they.
And I don't know that we've gotten any real feedback on that. I know that, I don't know, somebody told me years ago that the number of appeals that you get is a reflection on the inadequacy, let's say, of your zoning ordinance. Well, we adopted the new one right about the time COVID hit, as I recall, and probably a couple of years where, what, ZBA met once or twice?
Yeah, during COVID, we were not doing it. There was I guess I didn't follow it real closely, but there was that battle with the guy over on Portage Lake that resulted in litigation where he, I think, appealed a number of our decisions. And regrettably, we never ever heard back
Wow.
what happened, although I know he sold his property and has left now. And that might be an indication of how that went for him.
Yes.
I mean, I was aware, I went to a couple of the hearings in circuit court, but nothing ever much happened, you know. The judge would just say, well, I'm waiting for you to submit the materials that you said you were going to submit the last 6 times we were
Yeah.
here.
Yeah.
And it all just, I don't know, petered out and never went anywhere, I don't think, but we never heard anything more about
Yeah,
it.
I don't think we really have data. The question would come up once in a while, and I asked David if things are just slow, you know, building slow, or we don't have as many conflicts around the lakes. And I don't really think we have data on that. I don't think there's a feedback mechanism that has separated that.
Well, you're going to know how many ZBA variance applications you get, right? And I think it's trended down over the last
But is that
30
because
years.
building has been slow? Has it been due to COVID, due to the economy, due to, you know, the prices
Or
of...
the ordinance change.
Prices of doing anything, yes, or the ordinance change. So is it feedback on the quality of our document, or is it just all these external factors? I don't know.
So in general, and I work with about 7 other clients throughout southeastern Michigan. During COVID, construction obviously went down and home additions and whatnot. What has started to trend up in the past year and a half in terms of site plans and communities is mostly multiple family. You don't have a lot of multiple family areas, but also additions to homes in terms of decks and just all the things. And that actually had a big blip coming out of COVID because people had spent a lot more time at home. So I would say, and lakefront communities always are difficult. Usually those areas were platted as cottages, and so very small lots. I've seen, Village of Lake Orion was one of my early clients, and they had 10-foot wide lots, because people would come and put their tent there and camp. So you can imagine that would make things a little more difficult. So.
If we want to feel better about ourselves.
Yeah, exactly. There's always someone worse.
And thank God there's no 10-foot lots.
I feel better about my 50-foot lot right now.
Right, yeah. So they're always challenging, and there's a lot of things that come with the lakes that don't come with some other types of neighborhoods, in terms of storage and whatnot, and how people feel like their lake yard is their front yard, and their street yard is their backyard, and all of these things together. So I would say that based on trends in other communities, you probably experienced a little bit of a bump coming out of COVID. If you haven't had a lot of variances, then it means that things probably are working, or that people looked at it and thought, oh, I'm a little dissuaded. You also have a lot of that lakefront residential setback from the lake, where it takes it from one house to another in order to preserve that view. That is a little unusual, and so I think that's probably where a lot of people will come into, and it's really difficult to read what can encroach and by how much, and that's probably something that can be simplified. But also, when we talked to the supervisor about the planning and zoning department producing a report that would go to the township board, and one of the things that we would put in that is the number of permits per month. And that would be something that could be shared with you all as well, just as a matter of course in your packets. So then you can see those things. And those are easy queries out of the database that everything goes into called BSNA. So we're going to be starting those hopefully this month and then refining those over the course of next year.
I have a very specific question that popped into my head. When you were talking about permits, you're not going to do away with fence permits, are you?
I didn't propose that. Fence permits are something, like, that's something, it has a footing. If it goes in, it can be very expensive to rip out, so it's worthwhile to have a permit.
And we regulate different dimensional standards
Well,
of fences in the ordinance.
Again, this is just real specific, something I was thinking about the other day. In other communities, the zoning ordinance makes you keep your own fence off the lot line unless you get your neighbor's agreement. I don't think we have anything like that here, do we?
No, you don't. So that would be an ordinance change.
Yeah.
Yeah. Look into. I've seen, like, in one of my clients has been Ypsilanti Township, and they do ask for that.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, I think I had a case in Ypsilanti Township where that was an issue, was that you can't have a fence on the lot line unless both neighbors concur in the.
Yeah, and they have to have a certified survey.
Yeah.
Which is expensive.
Yeah.
So that's another factor to
Right,
think
but
about.
we don't have any of that kind of a requirement, so as long as your fence, in theory, is not over, I mean, you're gonna submit how does the fence and the structure and the side yard setback requirement then work out? Don't you have to be
They should submit.
inside the setback?
So, I do not know your zoning.
Yeah, I know.
Off the top of my head for fences.
Okay,
But typically what you see in a fence permit is that they give you a plot plan that shows where the fences are in relationship to the structures and to the lot line.
right,
And then they will give you a detail of the fence, so i.e. what the fence looks like when you're looking
Right.
at it and the height dimension.
right.
And what the materials are. In terms of how you would, then we went over inspections, because there's also a list of inspections that happen, and we talked about how fence inspections should happen, because if that was wrong, especially if they didn't face the nice side to the neighbors,
Yeah.
then these are things that should be fixed per the ordinance.
Right.
So in that inspection is where you would really,
No, but I'm still just thinking about, again, I haven't studied our ordinance well enough to know if there's an exception, but it seems to me if a fence is a structure, it would have to be inside your setbacks.
it can be, no, the fence regulations would say where that they need to be, and that's not necessarily a structure. Whenever so you say something's a structure, right? But whenever in the zoning ordinance, there's a section specific to the fences, and that has other regulations, those typically are looked at as exceptions to the overall setback.
Really?
Yeah, it says
Yeah.
here, 1616A1C, no, I'm sorry, B, setbacks, fences shall be located completely within the property being fenced.
Oh, within the property,
But
but
there's
not
no-
within this,
Property, yeah,
okay,
not within
got
the
it,
setback.
okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
Because
Okay, but that also means that you can put your fence more or less on the property
Right on top of the
line
property line.
without the ability to maintain it from the other side.
right,
that means you need to have good neighbors,
yeah.
Okay, all right,
which I've experienced in some lakefront communities sometimes.
okay.
Okay.
I'm good. Is everybody else good?
All good.
I really appreciate it.
Yeah, this was an excellent meeting. Thank you for suggesting it.
Are we going to have is there going to be a variance on the agenda in December, or does it look like?
There's going to be 3, actually.
Wow.
2
Holy-
from one applicant, and then 1 from a second applicant.
Okay.
And technically, they have through the end of this week to be able to meet the noticing requirements, so I don't expect any more, but we have 3 so far.
Okay,
One thing I'd like us to do is, if you know there's going to be a meeting, or as soon as you know there's going to be a meeting, or as soon as you know there's not going to be a meeting, just send out an email so we know, that's all.
Okay.
Because it's very annoying I don't know if there's meetings 8 days before, suddenly there's going to be a
Sure.
meeting when I miss it, so that'd be very helpful.
but usually,
Everything has to be noticed at least 15 days ahead of time, so.
almost always in the past, we've known on the date of our last meeting, like it'd be unusual for us in November not to know that there were applicants lined up for December, right?
I don't know if we ever know, but
No, I think well, yeah. No, you're right, we have another week for them to get their stuff in, but if people have been actively speaking with,
yes.
But that is, I think, one of those things that probably not well-defined, informally it was handled. David would send an email, hey,
yeah,
whichever group, there's not going to be a meeting this month.
and it usually was
And
pretty
when he
late in
left,
the
I think
game.
that
Right.
kind of fell
Yeah.
on,
Yeah.
kind of fell on the chairs.
Yeah,
Who's
so-
going to communicate
Yeah,
that?
the sooner the better.
Exactly, that's all that I'm
It'll be
saying. When you
good.
know one way or the other,
Yeah.
just let us know.
Sure.
Yeah.
That's it.
Cool.
So Megan, back to what you had said about drawing the line between 2 dwellings. So if the setback is 50 feet from the lake, if someone needs to build something, but the other 2 properties, the 2 buildings are not in compliance, you would draw a line between those 2 buildings, and then their setback is going to be between the 2 buildings? Is that what?
What ACRA, the lakefront residential lakefront setback, is that the lakefront setback is set by so it's a vacant lot, and there's 2 buildings, and these are the corners. You draw a line between them, and that's the setback. However, that setback from here to the lake has to be a minimum of 35 feet. So let's say that these 2 were lower and it was 25 feet, it has to be 35 feet, and that's your natural feature setback. So it's a little complicated. And the reason for drawing that, as I said before, is to preserve the views of the lakefront, of the views of the existing homes along the lakefront, because it's contextual. And I've seen them in other communities where they took like the average of 2 or 3 and then did math and algebra, when this is a much more elegant solution. Did I answer your question?
Engineering.
Yeah, I was just curious because we have a 50-foot setback where we are, and there's going to be a home built next door to us, and I thought that the post that was put in looked a little bit close to the water, and I was under the impression that we had to, if you have a vacant lot and you're starting from scratch, I thought you had to be, comply with the new guidelines or whatever, but,
Yeah, they would have to comply with the current zoning ordinance. So maybe it was 50 feet before and it got changed in this iteration, in this last iteration. But I think offline, if you let Ashley or I know the address of that, we could look into things further.
So I think if there was anything that we take away from this evening, like that we had to do first, because I feel like we verbally vomited on you for the past hour about this stuff. I don't understand why I feel that way, but I do. I think if we handle anything immediately, it would be the zoning ordinance issue with regard to the decision criteria.
Yeah.
And if the case law mandates that it is the word minimum amount, I would want from the township attorney a short memorandum. I don't know if I can.
About what minimum means?
About what that means. That would be very helpful for us in applying the appropriate standards created by case law.
All right. Yeah.
That would be great.
Can I ask one more question? When was the last time you group had a training?
I was going to
Training?
ask about that actually, but
As a group,
As a group?
I think
Yeah.
never, not during my time.
not this group.
Not
Zach,
this group, yeah.
Okay.
Zach was the last person to do trainings.
Oh, okay.
But it's my understanding that the township has money and that we can all take the class that's available to people who want to do zoning work.
Well, there's the citizens planner.
Citizens
and-
planner
And that
class.
answer also applies to planning commission.
Yeah.
That group has not had formal training, but there is, I don't remember if it's in the bylaws, perhaps it's in the planning commission bylaws, to be eligible for reappointment, I think you need to have taken the citizen planner course, taken past, which the township will reimburse you for once you provide them with your certificate of completion.
The other thing is there's, Michigan Association of Planning has a zoning board of appeals essentials, which is specifically designed for zoning board of appeals, since you deal with different issues and very specific things that we were talking about, where that may be also a training to look into with that. So I know that
Good
the
stuff.
township is also going into doing budgets, and so making sure that there's appropriate budget for that type of training.
It'd be great.
Some years ago, we had somebody come here and do a program. I don't know if you, is
Yeah,
that?
I was not, but
It was around 2015.
Oh, it could have been you.
It was me.
That's okay.
That would actually be right, yeah.
Well, all right, so are you ready to do that again for us?
Well, to all our clients, we do offer free training. One that we can do, and I can talk to the supervisor about it. But again, those sessions are usually about an hour. But I would highly recommend, if this group hasn't had it, to look into getting that CBA essentials. And some of it, I think there's something online, but I think also Michigan Association of Planning regularly runs those, and they'll have them different.
Megan, I think we prefer you.
I know.
Well, then, we'll talk. I'll talk to the supervisor.
Okay. Any other interactions here? Because you know how I am when we get to the end of the agenda. Nobody have anything else? All right, in that case, we're adjourned.